In this module, we'll be looking at the Baroque period. Remember, that started around 1600 and ends in about 1750. This is a period of time where we have moved back again to an extremely religious kind of orientation. As I said, we keep swinging back and forth. So in the Middle Ages, very religious. The Renaissance, a little more humanistic. The Baroque period, we swing back and become a little more religiously focused, not always in a good way. So the word Baroque comes from a Portuguese word that means an irregular pearl, and it was considered a derogatory term when it was first applied. It's a period of time where we will see a lot of ornamentation, decoration, perhaps overuse of decoration, and we will look at some architectural things that will give you a really good visual perspective on what that was like. It's also a period of a lot of drama, so people were very interested in stories. Opera comes out during this period of time, the ultimate dramatic thing. And as we talk about opera in more detail, you'll see how that really plays out to fit the whole Baroque mold. So this is a period of time that we had the 30 Years' War, which is from 1618 to 1648, so right at the beginning of the period of time, which was really a series of wars, not just one long war. But the whole thing was about religion. So we've had people who've been coexisting very nicely with their different religions, and then some ruler comes along and says, hey, I think everybody should be Catholic now. And obviously people were resistant to that, so there were battles, and other countries got involved, and it really was sort of a mini world war, considering the world was pretty small at the time. So lots of violence. It's a period of time when rape and murder were just commonplace. So we have a whole generation that grows up, this is 30 years, this is a whole generation of people that grew up with violence as a daily thing. So you can see that if you were living with that kind of thing, that you might really focus back on religion, because that seems like a much safer world than the world in which they were living. There are some very big names, politically speaking, during this period of time. So we have Louis XIV in France, who was not the kindest of monarchs. We have Charles II in England, who thought Louis XIV's model was really good, so he thought he would apply that as well. So we have rulers who are not necessarily taking the best interest of their subjects to heart. In Russia, we have Peter the Great, who at least did seem to be doing some things the right way. He's responsible for the building of St. Petersburg, so we have a wonderful, beautiful Russian city to thank Peter the Great for. We're still seeing a lot of traveling around the world. We saw the Renaissance period, we started to explore, opening up new continents that people didn't even know were there. The Dutch were a pretty busy bunch of people in the time. They sailed their little boats around to Indonesia, promptly closed it off and wouldn't let anybody else get in there. The spice market was a big deal, so they cornered the market on spices there. They also founded Cape Colony in what is now South Africa. So they not only had Indonesia locked up, they pretty much had the whole bottom half of Africa locked up where they could protect it, and if they didn't want you to get through, you probably couldn't. They went the other direction, came to America, and settled in what was then called New Amsterdam and is now what we call New York City. So they were spreading their wings in lots of different directions. This is the first period of time where the rest of us sort of thought about Japan at all. Obviously, Asian culture goes back as long as anybody else does. It was just something we don't really talk about a lot. But in this period of time is the period of the shogunate in Japan. So we had these shoguns who were in charge of their particular sections of the country. And it was a very good thing for them, because if you had a strong shogun, you had a strong segment of your society there. The economy got better, people had more peace in their lives, they didn't have to worry about people fighting all the time. So it was actually a great time to be Japanese. In fact, it's referred to as the Golden Age in Edo, which was the capital of Japan before Tokyo. Lots of very sophisticated people, very elegant. It was a great place to be. Staying in Asia, the Taj Mahal, which is probably the most famous monument in Southeast Asia, was built during this period of time, 1653. It is, of course, a memorial to the late wife of the Shah who built it. She died giving birth to their 15th child, and he built her this wonderful, elegant, beautiful marble building in her memory. That's a love story for you folks. In America, lots of things happening here as well. the founding of Jamestown in 1607, right at the beginning of the period. So, Columbus has been around 100 years before, but we don't really see much activity in terms of making settlements, bringing people over until the 1600s. The Puritans came to Massachusetts in 1620. As I said, the Dutch came to New York, and that was in 1624. We're a little bit behind, obviously. We're getting a late start on a lot of things. So whereas in Europe, many universities were founded in the Renaissance period, Harvard, which is the oldest university in America, was founded in 1636. So by American standards, it's really old. By European standards, not so much. I find it sort of astonishing, but we were actually exploring Alaska during this period of time. So in the 1720s, we were actually going that far north. So not only are they sailing the seas, but we're starting to head north and south and see what else is out there. So that's sort of the geographic perspective on things. Let's talk about the scientific things that are going on during this time. We already saw in the Renaissance period much more interest in scientific kind of study. During the Baroque period is the period of time that the scientific method that you learned in elementary school, observe, experiment, interpret, those three little steps, really comes around in the Baroque period. So scientists were observing what they saw, fiddling with it, figuring out what those changes, how those changes played out in the science. Johannes Kepler, during this period of time, decided that, gee, I think planets move in elliptical orbits, not circles. Up until this time, they just thought all the planets went around in nice, neat circles instead of lovely elliptical planes. Galileo, during this time, used his telescope, and he discovered that the Earth moved around the sun instead of the other way around. Needless to say, that did not make him popular with the church, because as far as the church was concerned, the Earth was the center of the universe, and everything else revolved around us. So Galileo got in a little trouble about that, but as we know, he was proved right in the end. Sir Isaac Newton is in this period of time, so that apple dropping on the head and gravity, all a Baroque thing. We have people studying the structure of plant cells, so not only we have telescopes, we have microscopes, so we're looking at things in smaller detail. We were able to determine how the human circulatory system works, so we saw how blood flowed around the body. These all seem like kind of modern things to me. I'm not a scientist, but it seems to me that that's pretty uptown for the 1600s. So in literature, the biggest names, John Milton, who wrote Paradise Lost, and Jonathan Swift, who wrote Gulliver's Travels. Gulliver's Travels is a great story for this period of time. It's all about exploring. And he runs into all these very different kinds of people, little tiny people, giant people. If you think about what people knew about the world at the time, yes, they knew there were other countries out there, but they had no idea what those people were like. So Jonathan Swift just played right into that and gave them this lovely story of all different kinds of people in different kinds of countries. Fits perfectly with the whole idea of the Baroque. In France, Molière is the big name. He's famous for writing farces. As we said, they like drama in the Baroque period, and a farce is the perfect drama because it's got silly characters and crazy situations. It's just really your basic 1600s sitcom. So very big, very popular, not just in France. So in painting, we'll see that the focus is now on everyday life. Everything painting up until now has been pretty much religious paintings, even though we saw them move from a very formal, sort of static, plasticky kind of approach to religious paintings, to making our saints and religious heroes a little more human. In the Baroque period, we start seeing paintings of actual people who are not connected to religious ideas. This is a period of time when people could actually afford to pay somebody to paint their portrait. So they would do that, but they would be much more casual paintings than we might expect of a portrait, where if you look at paintings from like the 1800s where everybody's very formal and got their hand on their hip and all those fancy sorts of things. You don't see that really much in the Baroque period. So we're going to look at 4 artists from this period of time from 4 very different kinds of cultures, actually. First, we're going to look at Rembrandt, who is probably the most famous name from the period. So Rembrandt is really well known for the way he used light and dark in painting. So if you go into an art gallery and you see a portrait of somebody and it's got a lot of dark colors, but there's some really striking white thing like a ruff around the neck or maybe a feather in the hat, and lighting that obviously comes from a specific direction, you can be fairly sure that that's either Rembrandt or somebody who followed kind of his approach. One of his contemporaries, country persons, I guess you would say, is one of the few women painters that we really know much about from the period of time. Her name was Judith Leyster, and she was also Dutch. She was actually married to a painter, so she was lucky, I guess, because her husband wasn't really intimidated by the fact that his wife was also talented and encouraged her to work. So what we have here is one of my favorite paintings. It's a self-portrait of her. We see painters do self-portraits of themselves all the time. Rembrandt did one, and his is like, I'm painter. You know, it's very formal, staring at the camera kind of look to it. But here we have this lovely portrait that Judith has done of herself, where it's like you've just come into her studio and she's going, hey, how you doing? She turns around to greet you in the painting. So she's still got her paintbrush in her hand. It's like she's just stopped what she's doing to talk to you. Very informal, very casual, but you know she's a painter. She's got her paintbrush, she's got her palette with her colors on it, and there's even a painting there. Probably a painting of her husband because it's a man and he's playing the violin. Her husband was also a musician. So it's a portrait, but not formal in the sense that we think of portraits from a later period of time. She shows some influence of Rembrandt because of the way the light's used in there, but it's just a really lovely, welcoming, hi, I'm Judith, come on into my studio kind of painting, which I think is just wonderful. Let's look now at another type of family portrait. We saw a portrait of George Washington's family when we did our sort of quick trip through the periods. This one is a portrait of a sort of noble family by Velázquez, so it's a Spanish painter. And as we look at this painting, this is a big painting and oriented this way, and about 2/3 of the painting is darkness. It's like the walls are dark. If you look really, really closely, you can see there's some paintings hanging back there. So we're in a big room with paintings. But the portrait is of this family. So we have some children. There's a dog. We love our dogs in our paintings. So obviously this is the family pet. But we even have the painter in the painting. So he's sort of done a self-portrait of himself. But it's not posed at all. It looks like they're all just sort of hanging around and can't decide what to do. Like, are we going to go out and play? Are we going to go do, chase the dog or what? It's all, you think, this is a family portrait? Really? It just sort of looks like I walked into the room and everybody was doing their own thing and I just happened to interrupt them. But it does show the influence of Rembrandt again with the use of light and dark, so that's something that we can think about as well. The last painter we're going to look at is an American painter, and this is Copley, whose name is familiar because half the things in Boston are named after him. Copley Square, there's probably a Copley Mall. I don't know. There's lots of things in the city named after him. But he was an American painter, and the painting that we're looking at is of Paul Revere. So it's the quintessential American hero kind of guy from Boston. You can see the influence of Rembrandt here, or at least the thinking of Rembrandt, which is interesting because Copley hadn't even met him. He didn't know Rembrandt's paintings at the time. So maybe this was just something in the atmosphere that painters were grabbing onto darks and light. So here we have a portrait of Paul Revere, who was a silversmith. So in his hand he has a piece of silver, a silver coffee pot, perhaps. The tools of his trade are on the table. He's wearing the shirt sleeves that he would wear to work. So, we're talking about Paul Revere, who's a major American hero, and even at that time, he was, an important guy. Painting is I'm just good old Paul Revere, your next door neighbor. Portraits of a different kind. All right, now let's take a look at architecture in the period of time, because in the Baroque period, architecture is a great way to see that sort of overdone thing. We haven't seen it in paintings. The paintings don't seem overdone to us. They seem really quite reasonable. Let's look here at this paint. It's not a painting, it's a photograph This is the inside of a church in Dürnstein, Austria, which is a very tiny little church. It's in a little tiny village, sits on the banks of the Danube River. But look at this. It's just covered in gold. It's got gold on practically every surface that we can get gold onto. It's decorated to the extreme. And this is a little church that probably only seats like 150 or 200 people. It's tiny. But you can see that they felt very strongly about making this church to the glory of God. And one way to do that is to decorate it up. So we have gold plate on lots of things, all the way up the walls. We don't have it in this particular picture, but on the back there's an organ loft, and it's full of gold things as well. We see Cupid-like angels and things all over the place. If you look at this from today's perspective, or if you think about looking at it from a 19th century perspective, you think, gee, really? Did you just kind of get carried away here, didn't you? That's what people were thinking when they thought, oh, the Baroque, it's a little over the top. And it is a little over the top, but in a beautiful kind of way. Let's look at one more piece of architectural, we'll call it whimsy, from the period of time. This is the Plague Column in Vienna. It was built in memory of all the people who died during one of the plagues, which you would think, okay, that shouldn't be a particularly cheery kind of thing. But there's this big thing, and it is kind of busy looking. It's like bodies climbing on each other, and I suppose these are plague victims trying to escape. But it's also got gold stuff plastered all over it. So even in a time when they were commemorating a particularly horrible experience in their lives, they decorated it to pieces. So again, you can see why through the perspective of time, people would think that that was probably something that they could have backed off just a bit on. But it gives us a really good picture of that you can keep in your mental bank there for when we start looking at the music of the period and how composers did that same sort of decorative element, but with musical notes instead of gold leaf and cupids.